Welcome to the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. We are in the final quarter of the 19th century, in a moment when Western occultism is making its most direct and systematic claims about empirical knowledge. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the Russian theosophist and company founder of the Theosophical Society, has spent 2 decades building a counter-archive to scientific materialism. Isis Unveiled published in 1877, is her manifesto, a 2-volume assault on the dogmatism of academic science and an attempt to rehabilitate the medieval and Renaissance fire philosophers Paracelsus, Adept, Van Helmont, the whole tradition of hermetic natural philosophy as possessors of a lost empirical method superior to modern physics. This passage comes near the end of Volume I, in a section defending mesmerism against the ridicule of French physicians and the Church, and it represents the core of Blavatsky's argument that occult philosophy is not superstition masquerading as knowledge, but rather knowledge itself, a systematic understanding of hidden natural forces. Our orthodox science has systematically refused to investigate. The spectroscope, Blavatsky argues, has vindicated Paracelsus. Now we read what she does with that vindication. Blavatsky belongs to the romantic response to Enlightenment materialism, but with a crucial difference. She is not merely defending mystical experience against reductive science. She is claiming that occult philosophy possesses a coherent physics, one that was empirically accurate centuries before modern chemistry could prove it. This is the dangerous claim that structures the entire passage, that Paracelsus and his lineage had access to a method of knowing nature that contemporary science has actively suppressed. By placing her argument alongside the mesmerism trials in France, where magistrates were forced to admit the reality of phenomena they could not explain, Blavatsky fuses the question of hidden forces in nature with the question of institutional authority. What is at stake is not merely whether the astral body exists, but whether the institutions of science have the right to determine what counts as knowledge. This section is found optional to turn-of-the-century occultism. Every hermetic order, every magical lodge in Europe and America that took itself seriously in the 1880s and 1890s read this text. Blavatsky's synthesis of Paracelsian philosophy, mesmerist phenomena, spectroscopic evidence, and the astral body became the lingua franca of the occult revival. But her deeper move, the insistence that occult claims were amenable to empirical verification, that they are not faith but method, changed how Western esotericism understood itself. The explosion of magical orders in the 1890s, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to the varied Rosicrucian societies, all operated inside the conceptual framework Blavatsky established here, that occultism is a science, poorly understood and institutionally excluded, but science nonetheless. The passage itself begins as a defense of mesmerism against accusations of fraud. Blavatsky recounts the trial of Madame Roger, the famous clairvoyant, arraigned before a French tribunal for obtaining money under false pretenses. Her counsel was Jules Favre, a noted orator. Her witness was Baron Dupotet, one of the last living masters of mesmerist theory in France. The case was dismissed. Blavatsky's argument is not that the magistrates believed in the astral body. She makes clear they did not, but rather that they dared not publicly deny what had become too widespread, too attested, to deny. 40 years of testimony, she writes. Dozens of credible witnesses. The accumulated evidence had become so substantial that official incredulity would itself appear as madness. This is Blavatsky's first move, the shifting of burden. She does not ask science to prove mesmerism true. She asks it to explain why it refuses to investigate what thousands of respectable people claim to have witnessed. She then pivots to a more radical thesis. Mesmerist phenomena, the cataleptic state particularly, cannot be simulated. Spirit photography can be faked. Spirit wrapping can be imitated by clever apparatus. But catalepsy, the state in which a mesmerized subject feels no pain, cannot be performed. Place a somnambulist on a public stage. She challenges, and let any conjurer duplicate what the mesmerists accomplish. Stick pins through her eyelids. Burn her flesh. The trickster cannot do it, because what is being demonstrated is not a trick but a fundamental property of human nature under certain conditions. The improbable becomes provable the moment you shift from asking whether spirits exist to asking whether certain states of consciousness exist. And consciousness under control, consciousness that can be directed by another's will, is something that can be tested. From here, Blavatsky makes her move into the deepest layer of her argument, the philosophy of Paracelsus. She invokes Lactantius, the early Christian father, who observed that no skeptic in his own time would have dared to claim that the soul dies with the body. A magician would be present and would simply summon the dead to prove otherwise. This is her model for how truth operates, not through a logical argument, but through the public demonstration of power. The magistrates in Madame Rogers' case were afraid to see her mesmerized because they understood, at some level beneath conscious admission, that if they witnessed the phenomenon directly, they would be forced to acknowledge it. Acknowledgement is worse than mere belief, it is a public capitulation. Now the text enters its true subject, the secret science of Paracelsus, that 16th century physician and alchemist who had been dead 3 centuries but whose writings Blavatsky treats as a prophetic account of 19th century physics. Paracelsus, she notes, was forced to write in obscurity. The church burned sorcerers by the dozen. His style appears unintelligible to the profane, but this obscurity was a necessity, not a deficiency. Within and without, like the scrolls of Ezekiel, the outer meaning is literal, the inner meaning is the true doctrine. Paracelsus's doctrine is this: the magnet attracts iron through a visible power, but it possesses a hidden power beyond that. In man, there exists a sidereal force (a power derived from the stars. The astral spirit, the spiritual form of man, is composed of the same emanation that flows from celestial bodies. This means that man and the stars are fundamentally identical in essence. They are mutual magnets. The elements compose the earthly body. The stars sustain intellect and thought. It is a comprehensive monism, a vision of the universe as a unified field of magnetic attraction and repulsion. Here Blavatsky plays her decisive card. The spectroscope has vindicated this. Modern physics has discovered that hydrogen, sodium, calcium, magnesium, and iron substances that compose the human body are found in the stars. In all the stars observed, numbering many hundreds, hydrogen was present except in 2. Paracelsus was ridiculed for claiming that man and stars are composed of identical substances. Now the spectroscope has proved him right. Does it not follow that the rest of his system, the astral body, the sidereal forces, the magnetic circulation of influences, will be substantiated in time? And then the essential question, how did Paracelsus know? How could he have known the composition of the stars when the spectroscope had not yet been invented? How could he have been certain of the nature of the starry host when everything was mystery? Blavatsky's answer is blunt. Through hermetic philosophy and alchemy, through methods that science refuses to acknowledge. Paracelsus discovered hydrogen itself. He studied astrology and astronomy as all the fire philosophers did. He was not guessing. He was claiming knowledge from a source that modern science will not even permit to be named. The passage then develops Paracelsus's theory of nutrition. The body is nourished not merely through the stomach but through a magnetic force that resides in all nature. Every member draws its specific nourishment through this invisible attraction. Man absorbs disease as well as health from the elements around him, because living bodies are subject to laws of attraction and chemical affinity. Here Blavatsky invokes contemporary physiology, imbibition, the absorbent property of organic tissues, is the mechanism by which this works. She cites Baron Reichenbach's discovery of eau subtle forces given off by all living things, identical with flames emanating from magnets and crystals. This is not mysticism. This is the physiology of an interconnected universe. The unity of the universe is the doctrine underlying everything. The human body possesses primeval cosmic matter. The spectroscope has proved this by demonstrating that the same chemical elements exist on Earth, in the Sun, and in all the stars. All stars are suns, similar in constitution to our own. The magnetic condition of the Earth changes with every variation on the Sun's surface. The stars, being suns, must also give off emanations that affect us in proportionate degrees. We live inside a field of celestial influence, and this influence is not metaphorical but physical. Paracelsus then addresses the nature of dreams and sleep. In dreams, the astral body is freed from the gross body. It can hover near its sleeping vehicle, or it can soar higher to communicate with its starry parents, the celestial sources from which it was drawn. Or it can communicate with other astral bodies at great distances. This is the source of prophetic dreams, of prescience, of knowledge of future wants. The elementary body, the physical body, does not possess these faculties. At death it descends into the earth and is reunited with the physical elements, while the several spirits return to the stars. Animals too have this astral body, this presentiment and connection to the celestial realm. Van Helmont, Paracelsus's disciple, develops this further. The theory of universal magnetism, the magnale magnum, is the doctrine of universal sympathy. Every effect refers itself back to its cause, both are reciprocated in a perfect exchange. Magnetism is an unknown property of heavenly nature, resembling the stars, unimpeded by space or time. Every created being possesses his own celestial power and is allied with heaven. This magical power lies hidden in the inner man. It sleeps, but by mere suggestion it can be roused into activity. Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic art, is the method by which this dormant magical strength is recovered and made living. Both philosophers agreed on a crucial point, the great potency of the will in the state of ecstasy. The spirit is everywhere diffused, the spirit is the medium of magnetism. Pure primeval magic does not consist in superstitious practices and vain ceremonies but in the imperial will of man. It is not the spirits of heaven and hell that master physical nature, but the soul and spirit of man, concealed within him as fire is concealed in flint. Cornelius Agrippa, the Renaissance magus, stated that the stars consist of the same elements as earthly bodies, and therefore ideas attract each other. Influences proceed through the help of the spirit, which is diffused through the whole universe and in full accord with human spirits. The magician who would acquire supernatural powers must possess faith, love, and hope. In all things there is a secret power concealed, and from this concealment come the miraculous powers of magic. Blavatsky then notes that the modern theory of general pleasantun concerning the positive and negative electricities of man and woman, and the mutual attraction and repulsion in nature coincides remarkably with the views of the fire philosophers and particularly Robert Fludd, the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians of England. Fludd taught that when two people approach, their magnetism is either passive or active, positive or negative. If their emanations are broken or thrown back, antipathy arises. If emanations pass through each other from both sides, positive magnetism flows, and rays proceed from center to circumference. Such magnetism affects sickness and moral sentiment alike. It is found in animals, plants, and minerals. Finally, Blavatsky turns to Mesmer himself, how he imported his Baconian system into France, basing everything on the philosophy and doctrines of the Paracelsites. She uses Mesmer's reception by the French medical establishment as a case study in how ignorance, superficiality, and prejudice display themselves in a scientific body when the subject clashes with cherished theories. The neglect of the Committee of the French Academy in 1784 is, she suggests, probably responsible for the present materialistic drift of the public mind. What we are witnessing in this passage is an act of synthesis and vindication. Blavatsky takes 3 centuries of hermetic and alchemical philosophy texts written in obscurity, ciphered, scattered, often misunderstood, and she argues that modern science has inadvertently confirmed them. The spectroscope did not disprove Paracelsus, it proved him right. The question then becomes, if Paracelsus was right about the composition of stars, why should we not trust him about the astral body? If Agrippa understood magnetic attraction and repulsion centuries before electricity was systematized, why should we dismiss his claim that the will can operate as a force in nature? If mesmerism is real, and Blavatsky argues it has been demonstrated beyond dispute, then the whole framework of hermetic philosophy becomes not superstition but a lost science, a natural philosophy suppressed by institutional power, waiting to be recovered and integrated with modern knowledge. The argument mutated from earlier defenses of occultism in several crucial ways. Medieval and Renaissance philosophers had written as if they possessed knowledge superior to Aristotelian science, but they had done so in a different register, one that accepted the limits of what could be publicly claimed. Blavatsky, writing in an age of triumphant materialism, when Darwinism and mechanistic physics seemed to have closed off the possibility of the non-material entirely, makes a different claim. Occult philosophy is not mysticism but empirical science, and it has been empirically vindicated by the very instruments, the spectroscope, that materialists developed. She seizes the language of progress and empiricism and uses it to rehabilitate magic. This argument seeded the entire theosophical movement and, through theosophy, much of modern Western occultism. The Golden Dawn borrowed Blavatsky's framework wholesale. Aleister Crowley, who would later position himself against theosophy, nevertheless accepted her fundamental premise, that occult practice works through knowable laws, that these laws can be systematized, and that they constitute a natural philosophy awaiting integration with modern science. Even contemporary occultism, with its talk of quantum mechanics and consciousness studies, inherits Blavatsky's move, the attempt to ground magical claims in the language and authority of science. But the passage also reveals the vulnerability of this argument. Blavatsky is forced to admit that the magistrates in the mesmerism trial were reluctant to acknowledge the phenomenon, that they dared not question it openly, that the acknowledgement was tacit. She celebrates their silence as a kind of victory, but it is a Pyrrhic one. The scientific establishment did not accept mesmerism, it merely declined to prosecute its practitioners. The distance between those two things is vast. Blavatsky's entire edifice rests on the claim that when science truly investigates the phenomena she describes, it will vindicate the hermetic philosophers. But what if science's silence is not agreement but refusal? What if the real reason magistrates would not challenge mesmerist phenomena in open court was not because the phenomena are real but because they were afraid of how their denial would sound, of how the public would interpret it? This is the crack in Blavatsky's armor, and it opened wider as the 20th century progressed. But in 1877, when Isis Unveiled was published, this argument was revolutionary. It gave theosophists and occultists a way to speak that was not defensive, not apologetic. It allowed them to claim that they possessed what science lacked, a method, a system, a coherent account of nature that merely awaited empirical confirmation. Every magical order that followed would lean on this framework. Every grimoire written after Blavatsky would inherit the assumption that magical practice is natural philosophy, not superstition, that it works because it describes real forces, not imaginary ones. What Blavatsky understood, perhaps better than her critics, was that the question of mesmerism and the astral body was not ultimately a question for empiricists. It was a question about authority, who has the right to determine what counts as knowledge. Once you accept that magistrates and academicians have an investment in certain conclusions, once you see how institutional power shapes what can be admitted as real, then the entire edifice of scientific authority becomes suspect. Blavatsky did not need to prove that the astral body exists. She only needed to make it plausible that a scientific establishment motivated by materialism would suppress its proof if it appeared. That work was already done. Next, Arthur Edward Waite, The Secret Doctrine in Israel. The Spitzen-Körper Thelema. If this archive serves you, support it on Patreon. Link in the description.